Good morning, Boker Tov. We should have Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael, for Kalal Yisrael. Welcome back to 10 Minutes of Meaning. Very grateful to our generous sponsors, Shmuel and Esther Shirewitz, Lila Nishmas, his father Yaakov Yudam and Gedalia, the Schus of Refuah Shlema of her mother, Batsheva Basbuma Rivka. This morning, 10 Minutes is sponsored by Gila Greiner in memory of her beloved mother, Rita Gila, and is sponsored in memory of my beloved aunt, Mrs. Malki Lazar, Esther Malka Bas Shmuel, the Yortzeit on Erev Yom Kippur. A very, very special and meaningful and important part of my life. We continue with the Iggeres HaRamban. Please help yourself in our Reb Shayla corner. Slushy, coffee, water, a Danish. Enjoy. We are an Iggeres HaRamban, the letter of the Ramban, the letter written ostensibly to the Ramban's son, but really written, as we've been saying to each and every one of us, how to live our best lives, be our best selves, and enhance our relationships in the most meaningful ways. How to condition and train ourselves not to get angry, how to be filled instead with awe, and how to connect both with Hashem and the people around us. So the Ramban writes, because we said in the absence of anger, where anger normally resides, if a person can in fact tisnaheg tamid, if we can reflexively condition ourselves always to all people in all times, speak calmly, serenely, keep our voice lowered, then if we can do that, then we'll be filled with midas ha'anava, with a sense of humility. Humility fills the place that anger was, because anger, of course, always comes from the ego. Anger comes from the ego. Why does someone get angry? You didn't do what I wanted. It didn't go according to my plan. It didn't meet my expectations. You didn't behave in line with what I want from you. So people get angry because of their ego. So if a person can help grow in sublimating their ego and not getting angry, what fills that space instead? Midas ha'anava, humility. So writes the Ramban, the kasher tisnaheg midas ha'anava, and when a person is filled with this quality of humility, lehis boshesh mikol adam. Very interesting. The Ramban is using his words in a very exacting fashion. The word lehis boshesh means, what does it mean? To be embarrassed, to be bashful, to be ashamed. What form of the verb is it? It's hitpael, it's reflexive. Lehis boshesh. So in other words, the Ramban is writing, don't actually be embarrassed and ashamed and bashful, but act, condition, transform yourself, mikol adam, from everyone. Ulehis pached mimenu uminachet. And when you have anava, when you live with humility, so act, condition, transform, present yourself as if you're ashamed, embarrassed, humbled, and be afraid. Lehis pached, act, make yourself afraid. Mimenu, who's mimenu? Hashem. So the sense of shame is before Mikol Adam, before everyone, before Hashem. Lehis pached, retreat with a sense of, wow, I'm so unworthy and I'm so humbled that I'm afraid from you, uminachet, and from mistakes and from sin. So let's unpack this incredible sentence the Ramban is writing his son, and the Ramban is writing all of us. Tisnaheg. So the Ramban here uses three verbs that are reflexive. Tisnaheg, hisposhesh, hispached. Just like the Ramban said, Tisnaheg tamid, l'daber benachas, l'kol adam l'choles. So the Ramban, the thesis of his whole letter is take ownership, take responsibility. How you behave, condition ourselves, train ourselves. We have the ability, we have that capacity. Don't wait for someone else. Don't wait to be inspired or motivated. Don't wait for someone to swoop in, but take control, take responsibility, condition yourself. Tisnaheg, hisposhesh, hispached. When someone has anava, there are two types of anava that you could have. There's an inherent or intrinsic anava. Who had such an anava? Who had such a humility? Only the most humble man that ever lived, most humble man of all time, who the Almighty, the Ribbon Shalom himself, testified to his humility, namely Moshe. Haish Moshe anav ma'od mikol adam asher pnei adama. Hashem himself testifies when Moshe's leadership is challenged, his own family. Moshe is the most humble of all people. And Moshe had that quality inherently, intrinsically. So he was. It's how he designed. It's how he trained himself. He was humble. He was humble. He was the smartest person in any room, the most righteous person in any room, the most selfless person in any room, the most empathetic person in any room. And yet, despite Moshe being the best, the most superior in any room, he walked in with anava. What can I learn from others? I don't need to speak the first or speak the loudest. How can I listen? That's who Moshe was, and certainly it's who we aspire to be. But says the Ramban, there is a second type of anava, and that is when it's not inherent, it's not intrinsic, and it's not natural, but tisnaheg. It's how we are behaving. Maybe a person is struggling. Internally, they have an enormous ego. Internally, they feel superior, holier than thou, higher than thou, greater than thou, internally. But nevertheless, says the Ramban, whatever you think, whatever you feel inside, when you walk in that room, when you're in that conversation, when you engage that relationship, tisnaheg b'midas ha'anava. Carry yourself with that quality of anava. And when you do, when you begin every conversation, every Shabbos table, every Yontif table, you walk into every boardroom, you walk into every interaction, tisnaheg, behaving with humility, then the result will be lehis boshesh mikol adam. You will feel a healthy sense of shame or bashfulness, mikol adam. Now, mikol adam means what? From the gadol ador, from the greatest rabbis, from the most accomplished, from the highest net worth people. The Ramban writes, mikol adam. From a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 100-year-old, from a rich and a poor and a wise and a fool, from a strong and a weak, mikol adam. If you really are able to carry and practice anava, then lehis poshesh, a person will feel a sense of bashfulness and maybe even a healthy dose of busha, a healthy dose of shame. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva that busha is one of the core and key qualities of tshuva. If a person has no shame, they don't blush, they don't recoil with a sense of shame. They did the wrong thing. They could have behaved better. They could have done more. Person should feel shame. Shame motivates. Not a debilitating shame, not a shame which paralyzes, but a healthy shame that motivates, that inspires, that pushes us, that elevates us. So liz boshesh, that shame, mikol adam. Mikol adam could be a kid who saw you, could be an adult, could be brilliant, could be not so smart, could be wealthy, could be indigent. But lehis boshesh, to present ourselves from everybody. Doesn't matter the age or the socioeconomic status. Everybody, mikol adam, from everybody, to be lehis boshesh, to be bashful, to demure, to have a healthy dose of shame, lehis boshesh, to transform ourselves to be that way. So even if internally a person says, this kid, I'm a gazillion times smarter, more righteous, better, but you know what? Lehis boshesh. Reflexively, lehis boshesh, that's how we carry ourselves. And then lehis bached mimenu. If you walk around, you think you're all that, if you live with a healthy ego, as we've said many times, not our own or not original, ego is an acronym for edging God out. If it's your ego pushing you, then you've pushed God out of the equation. It's you or him. There's not enough room in this world for both. And if we want Hashem in our lives, we want to feel his presence, his guiding hand, his loving embrace, his wink, his hug from above, then we've got to work on shrinking our ego, sublimating our ego, surrendering and submitting our ego. Only then is there room for Hashem. So when a person is tisnaheg, b'midas ha'anava, writes the Ramban, when we carry ourselves with this quality of anava, then lehis bached, we will be transformed from to fear Hashem, umin hachet. So I want to call to your attention, we don't have any more time, Rav Zatzal, the great mashkiach, has a whole essay that's called Emuna Bechet. The whole essay, it's brilliant. He has a whole essay about faith in Chet. Because many of us believe in Hashem, but our belief in Hashem is he's such a loving father and king, and he wants us to succeed, and he doesn't really care. The minutiae, the details, the mistakes, the failures, he overlooks it, he looks around it, doesn't register, he doesn't really care. So Rav Goldberg writes, person has to have emunah in Hashem, person has to have emunah in themselves, and a person has to live with a healthy emunah in Chet. Faith that there's such a thing called Chet. Hashem has expectations. There's accountability. There's responsibility. There are consequences. These are the days that we're facing those. Achet, Hashamnu, Bagadnu. We're here to take responsibility and accountability because Hashem doesn't overlook and ignore. He loves us. He loves us in our effort to take responsibility. He supports us. He loves us. But a person has to have emunah bechet. person has to have faith and belief that there is such a concept and institution of accountability, of responsibility, of consequences. I think it's the number one job of parents. We live in the generation what used to be called helicopter parents, who swoop in and save their children. Now they're called bulldozer parents. They bulldoze anything that's in front of their children, blocking them. Teachers, rabbis, employers, everything. They come in and bulldoze. And I think parents are actually making an enormous mistake. A person has to teach their children. There are consequences. You didn't do your homework? I'm not writing a note. I'm not calling the teacher. You're going to live with the consequence of showing up without having done your homework. That's how children learn, because that's how adults live. And that's ultimately how we will be accountable to Hashem. So, lehispached mimenu umin hachet. To have that sense from Hashem and from chet, emuna b'chet. We'll pick up with this Amir Hashem next time. Gemar Chasima Tova, a good gebench jar. We should hear Besoros Tovos, Yeshuos, V'nachamos. Thank you for staying.